So one-time New York Met pitcher Matt Harvey, earlier today on Instagram, called it a career, retiring, maybe not off to the sunset, but with some bumps and potholes along the way. He finally come to the realization at 34 years of age that his baseball life was coming to an end. And as a long, diehard, and yes, I'll say it, suffering Met fan, it was tough to see because we knew that when he came into the organization, not only as a draft pick in 2010, but his first start, July of 2012, when he threw 5 2/3 innings and struck out 11, and we thought to ourselves as Met fans, wait a minute, could this guy be our quote-unquote version of Tom Seaver? But it wasn't until next year, 2013, a Met team that had been languishing over the years post Carlos Beltran / Pedro Martinez, those final few years at Shea Stadium when it was moved across the street to Citi Field. Now we had a guy that we could rally around. Harvey Day, Happy Harvey Day was a thing in 2013, to the point where in an early regular season game in April, when he faced off against Steven Strasburg at Citi Field, there were people saying, Harvey's better. And that was something that the Met fan, like myself, hadn't heard in felt like decades. And when every time he toed the rubber, and every time he was on the mound, whether he was throwing a perfect game against the White Sox and he gave up 1 hit in 7 innings, the All-Star game, who could forget that? And I understand All-Star games, nobody really cares about anymore because it's just the exhibition. American League, National League isn't what it once was. But because the game was at Citi Field, I actually was there live. And there was so much electricity based on his start, the 2 innings that he pitched. First batter, Mike Trout, the first pitch he saw, a double down the right field line. Then he hit Robinson Cano in the knee before striking out 2 batters and getting, I believe it was Miguel Cabrera to fly out meekly to center field. It may have been Chris Davis. I think he actually struck out Miguel Cabrera, Jose Bautista, and then Chris Davis flying out to center field. And we had a guy. We had somebody that we were going to rally around, a guy that we could say that no matter what type of losing streak the Mets are in, we got our stopper. And it wasn't until later that summer when he was 9-4 with a 2.2 ERA where he, in a game against the Tigers, going up against, of all people, I believe he started against Max Scherzer that day, blew out his UCL, had to have Tommy John surgery, and we weren't going to see him until 2015. And then upon his return, yes, he did have those flashes. Yes, it wasn't anything like 2013, but he was still a very good and borderline dominant pitcher when he came back in 2015. But it all culminated toward the end of the year when we think about those final couple of weeks in September where he was already at his innings limit and his agent Scott Boras had said, nope, he's done pitching for the year. And with the Mets on the brink of making it into the playoffs, a lot of people thought, wait a minute, we need to have Matt Harvey on this staff in this rotation to pitch us into October to see where we could go as far as maybe even winning a World Series. And as it was, to spare all those details leading up to that, and Harvey taking the ball as he did in the Cubs series, as he did in the Dodger series, as well as the World Series, pitching game 1 where, all right, didn't win the game, got a no decision, but game 5 in that 2015 World Series, which, let's think about this. 2016, when he came back, he did have some good starts, but didn't really have the dominant, that zip, that fastball. That was long gone. But that October night, in fact, it was November 1st, the day after Halloween, come to think of it, when he went to that mound, and in the 9th inning, or between the 8th and 9th inning, when he debated and even argued with Terry Collins that I have to go back out there, I have to go and seal this deal, that he pitched 8 solid innings, gave up 4 hits. I forgot how many strikeouts off the top of my head. I think he had about 7 or 8 strikeouts. And this was going to be his last hurrah, knowing that this was the final home game of the Mets season where they needed to win or else they were going to lose and the Kansas City Royals would have been world champions. As it was, we know what happened. The walk to Lorenzo Cain, the questionable 3-2 slider, and then him coming out, Jerry's Familia coming in, and then the next thing we know, Eric Hosmer's a double over the head in left field where it brought in Cain, and then the throw by Lucas Duda to the plate, Salvador Perez, who was the MVP of that series, and then forget about it. The roof caved in, the Royals won, and the Mets were nowhere to be found, even though the following year they did make it into the wild card round before losing to Madison Bumgarner, and Noah Syndergaard was his starter. But it's not about 2016. It's not about Thor. It's about Matt Harvey. And that last start at Citi Field was Think about it. His last memorable great start that did not end in a win, that did not end in extending the series to a 6-game in Kansas City, where chances are it's a coin flip. Who knows? Jacob deGrom would have pitched Game 6, and Noah Syndergaard would have pitched Game 7. So we can't sit here to say that the Mets didn't have a shot. But in all likelihood, at least the Royals would have won on their home field. As it was, that was not to be the case. Then came the thoracic outlet syndrome in 2016, the rehab trying to come back in 2017, really being a shell of his old self. And in 2018, when he was a relief pitcher and was getting bombed left and right to the point where he didn't even show up to the ballpark. And therefore, his seal was fate as a New York Met. And we know he got traded to the Reds, and he said he'd want to play for 31 other teams, and all the comments, etc. And even going from there to Baltimore, where he pitched against the Mets a couple of years ago and came back to Citi Field for the first time and even expressed regret and thinking that things should have turned out differently, considering the Dark Knight label of 2013, that he had Gotham pretty much in his corner, that he was the toast of the town. And maybe that got to his head. And I would think it did get to his head. The celebrity, the models, the nightlife. When you're a starting pitcher who was as dominant as he was in that 2013 season, he had the city and pretty much the baseball world in his hands. But of course, like a lot of athletes out there, not only did it get to his head, but it got to a point where he was unable to sustain that. And therefore the injuries crept up, and the rehab and the long journey and roads back to try to be anything close to what he once was fell way short. And even his little stint in Los Angeles with the Angels and how he was just imploding left and right, giving up home runs, not even getting out of the third or fourth inning. This was a guy that was the Cape Crusader or the Dark Knight or whatever you want to call him. And he was anything but a superhero when he got to the latter part of his career. But on this day, as he says farewell to baseball, to the Mets, I'll never forget that number 33, that fist pump of him striking out Mike Moustakas when he blew him away with a 98-mile-per-hour fastball in that World Series. Just the steel look, the just overall guts, gumption, ferocity that he had for that fleeting time. He was literally a comet in the sky, even though he had success after that Tommy John surgery. But it's just a sad shame that his career never really became what we all hoped and thought it would be for one Matthew Edward Harvey. But even with all of the turmoil after that and all of the lost promise and not being able to get that fastball at 100 and it was just hovering around 95, where we all know if it's not hitting triple digits or anything close to it, it's not going to be sustainable for any pitcher unless you're Greg Maddux. But to you, Matt Harvey, I salute you. Thank you for the memories that you had in a Met uniform, for what you did for the town, especially in 2013, to put the Mets back on the map and to even go the full tilt, even in an effort where we weren't victorious in a Game 5 in that 2015 World Series. Whatever you do from this point on, all the best to you. And once again, thanks for those memories.